This video is to answer the question, what do we do for a child or an adult on a feeding tube, and especially when they have an infection problem that you're trying to fight. So first we need to build a foundation of what's going in that feeding tube, because the feeding tube is their lifeline of nutrition coming in. And there are several things you can do very, very quickly to change that, and then some longer term changes on what's going in the feeding tube. First, the quick changes.
Well, for quick changes to increase the amount of nutrition, especially for a child, but for anyone who's on a feeding tube, typically there's a lot of difficulty maintaining healthy tissue in the body, muscles and definitely fat. It's very hard for them to gain and maintain weight. So one of the most important, critical first things you can do is to begin adding slippery elm to whatever feeding medium you're giving them of liquid. Throw it in the blender with about 1 tablespoon of slippery elm for every 2 cups of liquid, and just add that to their feeding, whatever they're getting fed, and that will almost immediately increase the nutritional value of what they're getting. Slippery elm is a very nutritive and healing plant that immediately changes the health of the gut, which being having a feeding tube means very little fiber typically, and other things that allow the gut bacteria to thrive. So adding slippery elm is going to be an immediately quick help and support for someone who's on a feeding tube.
The other two properties of slippery elm are that it makes a place for the friendly bacteria to thrive, which is extremely critical for them to get all the nutrients out of the food that they're eating. And slippery elm calms gut tissue extremely fast, and so that the gut is not inflamed from having um, materials that may not be meeting their nutritional needs, may be inflammatory to them.
Right. And you can add to that again to add to the nutrition value. If you add like a tablespoon of blackstrap molasses to every 1 cup of feeding liquid or 2 cups of feeding liquid, that's also going to add a huge amount of nutritive value because of the minerals that are there and the extra support that that gives for nutrition value.
Now let's talk about the principle in a feeding tube that applies to all people, and that is variety. If we're eating the same thing every single day, we're not getting the variety that is needed to have the breadth of nutrition, because all the guidance that Heavenly Father has given is we need all of the foods that are in season. And so recognizing that changing out the variety of what goes into the food, and to follow the other principle of it needs to be fresh in season. So it goes through a blender, fresh in season, and is blended completely, or it goes through a vegetable juicer to increase the nutrition of it.
Right. Long term, and I will throw this out there just to begin with. Many years ago, I had a son who had a severe brain injury and was on a feeding tube for almost a year before his brain recovered enough that he could eat by mouth. Um, I learned a lot of things from that process, and I've learned a lot of things since then. If I knew then what I know now, here are some of the things that I would do. One of the things we did do at the time was to switch him over to goat milk rather than he was a very small child. He was under the age of 3. We switched over to using goat milk rather than water to mix with his formulas, and we saw an immediate improvement in his health. We also started adding,
And by the way, that is not cow's milk for
right, it,
sure.
it has to be goat milk. Cow's milk is very hard on the body. So we used raw, fresh goat milk. If you can't get that, I know that at Natural Grocers, Sprouts, and a few other places you can buy pasteurized goat milk, which is not the best, but it's certainly better than cow's milk. Um, we also learned we stopped putting formula in with the goat milk and instead began adding whole foods. So we would use fruits and vegetables that we could put in the blender with the goat milk and blend that. Typically as much high calorie food as possible because it's very hard, again, for the body to get adequate nutrition that way. You can add um, nuts or nut butters, actually, of whatever kind, unless there's an allergy issue. And then, of course, you want to be careful with that. You can add seeds. You can add um, hemp. If there's a nut allergy issue, you can use hemp seeds. You can use sunflower seeds. Those are both very high in fat and nutrition, and they're very, very helpful to add to the liquid to again increase the nutrition.
Soaked chia seeds, soaked flax seeds.
Right.
Oh, we forgot on slippery elm. That that will go completely solid if you let it sit too long. So you need
Well,
to make it, well,
not
not
completely.
solid solid, but it won't go through a tube anymore.
Right. So you want to do it fresh. You want to do slippery elm immediately fresh into the tube while it's still liquid. Um, and
Where
it,
several of the seeds need to soak overnight to actually
right.
absorb the water and then
And
turn
then they're soft enough to blend.
it. Mhm.
Yes. Um, the other thing would be to add, again, high nutrition value things, fruits and vegetables, maybe some berries. Berries are extremely high in nutrition, but they are low in calories. So again, you want to add those other things that are going to add the calorie needs in. Fresh vegetables, the same thing. They're high in nutrition, but they're low in calories, and that's because of that fiber bulk. And so you want to add those in gradually so that you're not overwhelming the stomach and the gut, but you want to add those a little bit at a time and start increasing the amount of actual fresh whole nutrition that the person is getting. Um, and do it carefully and gradually so that you don't give them too much all at once when their gut has not been used to having any of that at all.
That's the reason for the slippery elm, to start with slippery elm. That's the very first step there so that it'll calm that down. Remember to use your muscle testing. Don't throw things at this person that don't muscle test well for the person.
Right.
They need to have what's perfect for them, and then to be open to varying that based on your muscle testing so that they're getting completely perfect for them on a daily basis.
Just as you would do for yourself, right? And the diet that gets varied is the diet that's the most healthy and wholesome. It's very hard to add grains to a feeding tube diet. Um, you can do it somewhat with some grains, rice, for example, um, or some of the gluten-free grains get soft enough that you could add a little bit into the formula and grind those up. But because they are so starchy and so on. It's very hard to add those, but you can still get a broad nutrition base with vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds, um, and making sure that that's all going in. And again, the goat milk that helps in the calorie value, but also in the nutrient side of things.
So the slippery elm powder is a foundation. Now let's talk a little bit about how, and that builds a foundation so they're not getting sick.
Right. Oh, I almost forgot. You can add some wholesome oils to that. And when I say oils, you don't want to add a lot. Maybe a teaspoon of oil,
Half a teaspoon.
right? Of
Mm-mm.
good extra virgin olive oil that's cold pressed, um, some melted coconut oil. That those two in particular are known to be extremely healthy and nutritive. The Savior himself loved olive oil, and it's a sacred special oil that really it was meant for our bodies. And so adding a little bit of that will, again, not just increase the nutrition value, it will help our body absorb a lot of the nutrients that are fat soluble. So it's just really a useful tool to add.
Anything else on building a foundation of nutrition besides variety and wholesome in season?
Right.
Okay. Then we need to talk a little bit about fighting an infection if there is an infection. And again, muscle test what's perfectly right for that individual, but here's some methodologies to find that and to be able to introduce it through a feeding tube or through areas of the body that can absorb and clear an infection. The first one that I'd like to talk about is onion and honey, onion and garlic with honey. If you have never heard of chopping up an onion and covering it with honey, by chopping that onion, then covering it with honey, you've got a mixture that within just a few hours turns to liquid. And you can actually take that liquid and introduce a teaspoon and a half or up to a tablespoon in the feeding tube to give them a completely antibiotic, antiviral mixture that's that's going in and working very, very powerfully.
Right. And
Add
adding,
garlic to
yeah.
that. Yeah, that's what
I was
that's
just thinking, yes, add a couple of cloves of garlic to that. So one whole onion and maybe
chopped fine.
chopped very fine, and maybe two or three cloves of garlic chopped fine in a dish. Barely cover that with honey.
Raw honey, any kind of honey will work. Even if it's crystallized, it will still convert to a liquid with that onion garlic mixture. And so just using, make sure it's raw. It doesn't doesn't work if it's been heated, pasteurized, whatever
Right.
else
Right.
processing might have been done to it. That is super, super powerful. The other thing you can do with an onion immediately is to just chop an onion and set it next to the bedside. And that vapor from the onion will kill the bacterial things that are in the room and in the lungs and start working from the lungs.
Right.
What do we do with garlic now on the outside?
So one of the things, Dr. Christopher had a method where he would smear the feet with Vaseline of a child, smear the feet with Vaseline, add chopped garlic to that,
Crushed
after,
or chopped?
yep, yep, crushed garlic over the Vaseline, then some plastic wrap to keep the Vaseline from getting on everything, and then a sock over that. I would not use Vaseline because it is a toxic petroleum-based uh, thing, but you could do the same thing probably with coconut oil. Um, any kind of a solid oil, palm oil might work also. Palm shortening that you can get at a natural grocer or Whole Foods. Either one of those will work. The palm shortening will not melt as quickly. Coconut oil, of course, will melt very quickly on the skin because it is melted at just a little above room temperature. But coconut oil would work, or garlic oil, and again, cover that with plastic wrap so that the oil doesn't get all over everything, and a sock over that to hold the plastic in place.
So let's walk through that again since you may not have visualized that. You're covering the foot with coconut oil or another oil so that you're not putting garlic directly on the skin. Garlic will burn the skin if it's directly on it.
Right.
And you can do this on the palms of the hands too. It'll absorb really fast, but most children won't allow the palms of their hands to be covered with oil and garlic. So you put it on the sole of the foot, and then the crushed or chopped garlic very thinly spread on that, and then cover it with a plastic cover enough to keep it from moving, or just a paper towel, and then a sock over that. Be sensitive to them telling you it's too hot and get it off after an hour or two if it starts burning them, because garlic will burn skin. It can feel very, very hot, but it's also extremely effective at clearing bacterial and viral infections.
Yes.
Mullein tea, Mullein, mullein leaf or mullein root and seed or mullein flower. The whole plant is medicinal and it's completely antibiotic, antiviral, and antifungal. And you can make a tea out of the mullein leaf and use that directly into the feeding tube. You could take mullein root and seed tincture or What other tinctures would work to mix in?
One of the ones that comes to my mind is Dr. Christopher's formula, Kitty Well, um, which is a good, just general flu and cold kind of formula. And it's made in a glycerin tincture so that it's safe for children. That's one that you could add to whatever, and you can add it pretty much as often as needed or want muscle tested for, just because it's completely non-harmful, completely safe.
And mullein, garlic, you take a look at all of the herbs that are antibiotic, antiviral, and just muscle test which ones will work for this specific challenge. And then usually you can find those in a glycerin formula or an apple cider vinegar tincture formula.
Right? Or make tea with the whole plant and utilize the tea. It's very effective in that way.
And the principle is really go after that virus or bacteria early. Don't wait until it's gone body wide. Go very aggressively early, um, and with plenty of materials for the body to fight it.
Right. That's another great point about using the slippery elm and the molasses in the feeding as you're fighting the infection. The more materials the body has to strengthen the immune system, the more effective those other herbs are going to be in fighting off that infection. The mullein, the garlic, ginger, whatever it is that comes up as needed for that infection.
Yeah, building that solid foundation first with nutrition. Remember also that your environment that you create for that individual is just as important as the nutrition going in. There should be uplifting music playing. There should be uplifting um, video playing for the individual.
The
It,
talk should be positive and loving. If there's contention in the family or around that person, find ways to resolve that and get it away. It just brings it makes it very difficult for someone to heal and to get better when there's contention or a lot of negativity.
yeah, a loving animal um, spreads a lot of love, but just joy and happiness and laughter and light. That individual needs to be out in the sunshine every single day for 15 or 20 minutes or maybe 30 minutes. The first 2 hours of the day and the last 2 hours of the day are the best sunshine.
Yep. Even if that's through a window, if you can get them to a window where the sun is coming in and let them have 15 or 20 minutes in the sun. That's also going to dramatically increase the ability of the body to heal from infection
Yep,
and to stay healthy, quite
yep.
truthfully.
And we heal because of the Savior's love. So talking to them about God's love for them makes all the difference in the world because that gives the body a chance to recognize this is not a physical experience. This is really spiritual. And the experience they're gaining spiritually is critical to them so that they can heal and they can actually recognize that they're loved and that this mortal experience is a gift to their experience.
Mm.
Any other foundational things you can think of?
Nope, I think making sure that they've got that nutrition base and making sure that their whole nutritional needs are being met long term is going to help avoid those kinds of situations where there's an infection going forward. It strengthen the immune system.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we wish you the very best in taking care of that loved one.